presenters for today, who are leaders within the NINDS research networks. We have Dr. Chris Coffey, who is the PI for the Data Coordinating Center for NeuroNext at the University of Iowa. We have Dr. Pooja Khatri, who is the MPI for the StrokeNet National Coordinating Center, who joins us from Yale. And then we have Dr. Valerie Durkalski-Mauldin, who is the MPI for the Data Coordinating Center for the Siren Network. So today they'll each present an overview of their network and then participate in discussion. And I will let Chris share slides and get started.
All right,
Thanks,
Megan. Let me pull the slides up. All right, so as Megan mentioned, we're going to talk about three broad networks. This is going to be pretty short presentations. I think each of us will only give like a 5-10 minute high level overview of our networks and then have a lot of time for questions, and we can go in whatever areas people are more interested in. To kind of set the tone, and kudos to Pooja put these slides together. I just pulled them in since I was going first, but I mean, clinical trials historically, it's kind of this whole system of dismantling and rebuilding. So in some ways, when you take a step back and look at it, it's a very inefficient way to do it, where you set up a trial, you build all the infrastructure, you put this complex piece of machinery in place, you do the study, you get to the end, you tear it all down, and then another trial comes and you start trying to put new pieces together. So I think that's been kind of the rationale to this movement towards networks, at least within NINDS. This started, the one that's grayed out at the top, just to give some historical context. I think Valerie will talk about this a bit more because her group was involved, was with NET, which was a phase 3 trial network in emergency neurology, which was kind of sunset when Siren came on board. What you'll hear about today are three different networks. So there are some similarities and there are some differences among the three networks, partly in the types of diseases, types of trials, and then the phase of research that they will study. So in NeuroNext, which is the first one you'll hear about, which I'm involved with, it's mostly early phase trials in the neurosciences. We don't, at least currently, don't do phase 3 clinical trials. But then within StrokeNet, which is the one Pooja will talk about, they do phase 2 and 3 trials in stroke, kind of across the different areas of stroke, treatment, prevention, and recovery. And then Siren, which you'll hear from Valerie, is kind of phase 2 and 3 in emergency neurology, obviously except for stroke, which would be in StrokeNet, cardiovascular, respiratory, and trauma. So Siren, and Valerie will give more about this, is also not just an NINDS, it's co-funded by NINDS and NHLBI. So that kind of sets the stage for this. First, I'll talk a little bit about NeuroNext. NeuroNext is a phase 2 clinical trial network. It's a clinical trial network where that was funded in 2011. It was initially funded primarily to do phase 2 clinical trials, with the rationale at the time from NINDS being that there were so many things that had come through the pipeline at NINDS that had relatively promising looking early phase studies, but then got to phase 3 trials and did not, succeed to show benefit. And so part of the rationale for forming this across the broad range of diseases under the NINDS umbrella was to try to do more efficient phase 2 studies with more rigid go, no-go criteria. So that's one of the important components with the studies that we do within NeuroNext. It has expanded a bit over the years with different areas. In particular, we've always done phase 2 clinical trials for the most part, with biomarker validation studies also being included in NeuroNext. So not discovery, it has to be a validation of kind of a biomarker that has some preliminary evidence. In our last renewal in 2023, we expanded to cover very early phase gene therapy trials. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So that's kind of a different shift. Where now, for instance, we just are in the process of launching our first in human gene therapy trial, which is very different from the studies that we've done in the network to date. This is kind of just an attempt at getting the network structure down. I think with all of these networks, it's hard to get the full structure because there's a lot of moving pieces. Some of the basics, I think, are the same, but exactly how the pieces come together might differ slightly across the networks. There's a data coordinating center here at Iowa. There's a clinical coordinating center at Massachusetts General Hospital. And then there are a number of funded sites within the network. And then there's various regulatory and oversight groups that look at this. Then there's also the protocol PI who would be the person who brings the study in. And so this is very much a partnership. The PI aligns with the network and we work together to do this. So it's kind of a shared leadership model between the PI and the network leadership and the network sites in terms of trying to help flesh out a proposal and then, successfully conduct the studies. This is the basics of the network infrastructure with the main high-level pieces, NIH, NINDS, with our current program director and project scientist, Joan O'Hayon and Lumi Sawaki-Adams, who work very closely with us. There's a clinical coordinating center, as I mentioned, at MGH, with co-principal investigators, Merit Sokovich and Alex Vidinovich. And then Marianne Chase is the director of study operations. And then at the DCC here at Iowa, I'm the principal investigator. And then Dixie Eklund, who many of you will meet at the course, is our director of operations. We currently have 14 funded sites. I've listed them here. They were chosen for both their experience in neurological clinical trials, but also to have some geographic diversity with respect to coverage for our clinical trials. We're on our third renewal. Some sites have been added, some sites were in and are no longer in, but this is the current 14. Although sites don't have to be in the network to participate in network studies, particularly if there's disease expertise for a given study at a site that is not in the network. As one of the things about NeuroNext that is probably both a strength and a maybe not a weakness, but a big challenge that's different from some of the others is we cover such a broad range of diseases that the experts for a given disease, particularly if you get into a rare disease, may not be at one of our network sites. To give a sense of kind of the depth of coverage of diseases that we've looked at so far, and I'll focus on the completed studies. We've had many others come through, that didn't go forward for various reasons. We've had 2 completed biomarker studies. Our very first study was a biomarker study in spinal muscular atrophy that was conducted around the time that the first therapeutics for SMA were coming on board, and so our biomarker study was the data were shared and used as supplemental data in some of the early regulatory submissions. And those of you who know anything about SMA, just in the 15 years since the network was formed, the therapeutic landscape in SMA has dramatically changed since then with respect to what is available to diagnosed infants with SMA. We also recently conducted a biomarker study in glioblastoma multiforme. I won't go into much details about that other than to say SMA and glioblastoma are 2 very different types of diseases, which kind of illustrates how broad the coverage of things we look at in NeuroNext. With respect to phase 2 clinical trial, I've listed here the 8 that we have completed to date, along with the disease areas. And again, I won't go too much in depth into any of these unless in the discussion somebody wants to know more. But you can kind of get a sense of here of how broad the disease states that we cover in the network are, from things like Parkinson's and Huntington's all the way to Fragile X, G&E myopathy. We're kind of anything that falls under the NINDS umbrella that is not stroke or something that would go under Siren would be in play for NeuroNext. Some of the highlights of network success to date, I mentioned that we've had 12 studies funded, all in different disease areas. We've had 10 completed. We have 2 actively enrolling, including our first gene therapy study. I think, there's been operational efficiency. We've been able to build various partnerships with academic PIs, foundations, and industry. There had been an SBIR mechanism for NeuroNext. It is not currently active because of the SBIR whole system within the government ending. It's now been renewed, but the process of getting a new request out for SBIRs is still in the process. I think we'll have it again, but it's kind of up in the air. We are accepting applications for any of these. I think one of the big sources of confusion often is people thinking they have to be at a network site to submit a proposal. That is not the case. Anyone, anywhere can submit a proposal to NeuralNext. It's a little more fleshed out, but not that different from what the students who are involved in the course submitted when you were applying for the course. It's basically a rough draft of an idea, a clinical idea that you have with some basics of the general structure, and then that gets reviewed uh, and goes through a variety of processes. First, you'd have discussions with NINDS, then it would come to the network, and if it's kind of feasible and suitable for the network, it would go through what currently is the OTA mechanism, which stands for Other Transactional Authority, which is what NINDS use for the studies within the network. There are two currently open OTA mechanism proposals for the biomarker studies or the clinical trials. There's a stage 1 and a stage 2, so it's a two-stage process to come through, where stage 1 is kind of a high-level overview, which is kind of an initial high-level review, which is focusing mostly on the scientific rationale and basically whether reviewers feel like this is something that is scientifically meaningful and would contribute to the disease area. If it passes that, then it comes to the network to flesh out a full protocol and a full kind of grant application that would go to the stage 2 review, which is it's not in name the same, but structurally it's very similar, I think, to the standard grant review, where people would review it, provide feedback, and then that would be where the ultimate decision for funding would be made. So we'll make these slides available if anyone wants these. There's a QR code on here that should take you to that, but also our website is www.neuralnext.org, which also has links to these as well. As I mentioned, in 2023, we also added the gene therapy trials as part of the network. This was kind of a partnership that was or kind of a linking partnership from NINDS with another existing network called Urgent, or the Ultra Rare Gene-Based Therapy Network. This was a network that was in place to kind of look at kind of the pre-clinical aspects of gene-based therapies for ultra-rare neurological and neuromuscular diseases. So part of the idea when NINDS put this together is that as things move through Urgent, which they were starting to see by the time we were renewed in 2023, that NeuralNext would have the infrastructure to take what has been done through Urgent and then pull it into the clinical framework to start to do the needed clinical trials to then study these further. We have our first one. We have screened the first participant. They are, if everything goes well, hopefully to be dosed next week. And it is a gene therapy for prion disease. So, very complicated first in human study and a very complicated disease, but something that's been really exciting and interesting to be involved with. The Urgent clinical trial, so for the gene therapy studies, it's a very similar process to the clinical trials. There are two stages, stage 1 and stage 2. There are separate OT proposals. The concept is the same. The information, obviously, as you might expect, is slightly different in what's required. And again, there's a QR code here. The information is available on the website. The one other piece, if I will mention, if anyone has an interest with gene therapy, even if you're not in the Urgent network, other things can come through. So we're not restricted just to things that come out of Urgent into the network. Another thing that was put in place with our most recent renewal is a gene therapy consortium. So we have a consortium, which is basically a committee of 10 individuals with experience in gene therapy studies that are available to anyone who is considering a proposal for a gene therapy study in the network to come to get advice on their conceptual phase, help them with trial design, give advice on various questions that they might be struggling with. And for the investigators that have utilized this group to date, they found it extremely successful because this group has coverage across a wide range and types of gene therapy studies and can provide a lot of good, not just high-level advice, but also bring their experience and things that they've seen work successfully and or not work successfully in gene therapy studies. So I will stop there. That's kind of a quick overview of NeuroNext. As mentioned by Megan at the beginning, obviously any of these things we can get deeper into when we get to the discussion. But at this point, I will turn it over to Valerie, who will give an overview of Siren.
Thanks, Chris. Great, everyone see my screen okay? Good. Well, hi, everybody. I'll give you an overview of Siren and who we are. So Chris kind of mentioned this, but Siren was initiated in 2017 and is currently ongoing and funded by NINDS and NHLBI, but it does have a rich history. So the Data Coordinating Center and the Clinical Coordinating Center, Siren, actually worked together way back starting in 2007 when we had NET, which was the Neurological Emergency Treatment Trial Network. And after in 2017, it was time for a competitive renewal. But at the same time, there was the Resuscitation Outcomes Consortium Network funded by NHLBI. And that network was also coming to an end. So the institutes developed this request for applications for a new network called Siren. And there's some players from both networks that now participate in Siren. The real principles behind the Siren network are we focus on early treatment or an emergency setting. We want meaningful outcomes for patients, conducting trials with efficiency, but also highly focused on collaboration among all parties involved. And we also want to give back, right? So everything we're learning, we want to help transform the clinical trials enterprise. So those are key values of Siren. The infrastructure, we're really similar to what Chris described for NeuroNext. We have a clinical coordinating center and a data coordinating center. There are identified hubs that I'll show you a map of where those are located. But all of this in partnership with NIH forms a steering committee. Similar to NeuroNext, and I'll talk about this later on too, but trial ideas, this is not a closed network, so trial ideas really can come from anyone. You don't have to be an award hub or a hub participating. So we take in trial ideas and we partner with our trial PIs to develop the studies and implement the trials. We also have several working groups, which is part of our educational mission, and we work with a central IRB at VARA. The leadership, so our clinical coordinating center partners, there's William Barson and Robert Silverglide at the University of Michigan. And again, we worked with them during the NET days. And then we also have Cliff Calloway from Pittsburgh, and Cliff was part of the ROC Consortium. On the DCC side, my colleague Sharon Yates, she did the sample size webinar just a few weeks ago. We helped lead the Data Coordinating Center here at the Medical University of South Carolina. This team works together. In partnership with NIH, we have an organizational structure, bylaws, and procedures. We try to be as open as possible, right? So we have our Siren standard operating procedures are available to the public, and you can go to our Siren website to view different materials that we post. For our data coordinating center, we have an internally developed clinical trials management system called the WebDCU. Some of you may have used it, but that's what we use for the network. And as I mentioned, we have an emergency research central IRB, which is at VARA, and we use these for all Siren trials. Here's our 15 award hubs at various locations. They're kind of the bright blue that you would see on this map. But then in addition to that, and I'll go into which trials we're actually currently conducting, but this is just a snapshot of some of the trials and where we span sites. So similar to what Chris was describing with NeuroNext, we have this hub spoke structure. So you might have like Duke University as an award hub. They received a certain amount of funds to develop their infrastructure to be a hub, but then they branch out into getting sites to participate in trials. So we call that the hub spoke structure. So we really try to span across the US. And we also have some international trials as well. So our current studies, we have 2 traumatic brain injury trials. One's called HOBIT, which is hyperbaric oxygen, and the other one is BOOST, which are both being currently conducted. We also have cardiac arrest trials. So you might be familiar with the adult ICE-CAP trial or the pediatric ICE-CAP trial, P-ICE-CAP. And we also have an observational study called post-ICE-CAP. We recently initiated a trial in status epilepticus, which is the KeySet trial, which is currently enrolling. And we're also about to launch a respiratory failure trial called the Windsurfer trial. And those asterisks on the screen, because we're dealing with an emergency research environment, we have what is EFIC, right, or exception from informed consent in the emergency setting. So the trials with the asterisks show what's being conducted under EFIC. In addition to what we call, these are the parent trials, the big multi-center trials, a lot of our trials also have ancillary studies. So investigators pitch what they can tag on to the parent trial to answer other additional important questions that maybe the parent trial isn't answering. So some of our ancillary studies might have biomarker aspects or other types of long-term follow-up, but a lot of our trials do have ancillary studies tagged onto them. So getting into some of the things that Siren focuses on, we have a lot of complex designs, and I think having a network infrastructure has really been a key factor in the success of us implementing our designs. As I mentioned, a lot of our studies have exception from informed consent, which is a whole process with community consultation that we've been working on for a long time. Robert Silberglide has really, steered us in that direction, and we've gained a lot of knowledge about how to conduct trials in an EFIC setting. But we also have some really interesting design components. We have a lot of adaptive designs we do. So like the HOVIT has a response adaptive randomization aspect to it. The BOOST trial, the outcome, we're using a sliding dichotomy to better define the outcome based on baseline severity. The ICE-CAP, the adult and the pediatric ICE-CAP trials are a very interesting Bayesian adaptive design where we have looking for various doses or periods of cooling. So it's an adaptive dose finding design. During the pandemic, we conducted a trial called C3PO, which was looking at convalescent plasma, which was an adaptive sample size re-estimation design. So just a lot of interesting features that we've been able to gain a lot of experience in. The new trials, right? So all of our trials are at some phase ongoing. Pretty soon, ICE-CAP will be releasing results. That'll be one trial that will be completing this year, but the other trials are still ongoing. And the ones we recently kicked off, KeySet, another interesting Bayesian adaptive design, and then the Windsurfer trial, which is the respiratory failure trial, we're actually looking at a hierarchical endpoint and using the win ratio for that. So again, just a lot of different interesting design features. We think of the disease area, again, some similarities with Neuronext. In Siren, we look at a lot of different disease areas. If we think about we're working in an emergency department setting, but sometimes we have pre-hospital studies, sometimes the interventions there, or sometimes the interventions when they hit the emergency department. But this is just kind of a graphic of all the different, and this isn't even all inclusive of some of the different trial disease areas we've been exploring for trials. Like we recently put in a grant for a headache study. We're hoping one day to do a spinal cord injury study. So just a lot of different great ideas coming through in this setting. So how do you propose a study? Well, for trials to be appropriate for Siren, we really are addressing emergency care treatment, and we get our funding from NINDS and NHLBI. We look for patient-oriented primary outcomes, rigorous design. So again, it's a partnership that we'd be working with anyone who pitches a study to really come up with the best design, and we have a process for that. We also are looking at sample sizes. We're in the phase 2, phase 3 space. So we are looking for sample sizes where we can use the entire network, right? So again, we have about 15 award hubs. We'd like to use all of those if possible. So those are kind of the size of the study we're looking for. So how does it work? So we're an open network, as I mentioned earlier. Anyone can come to us with an idea. So if an investigator brings an idea to us, we work with them to flesh out the design, and we pull in our NIH partners for their feedback. Typically in the past, we used to have to get institute pre-approval to submit. That's no longer the case, but for Siren, we still work with our NIH partners, and we present the idea to them, see if we can get any feedback from them before the grant application. So it's more of an informal, at this stage, pre-approval process. And then the grant goes and it goes through study section, and if we have to resubmit, but I can't stress enough, this truly is a partnership. And even if we have multiple trials going or multiple grant applications going in at the same time, there's enough of us that we parse out and take the lead and work with our trial PIs to just put forth the best idea possible. As far as funding opportunities, there are currently 2 PARs out there that exist. So the NINDS has the UG3, UH3, but through NHLBI, it's a little different because with NHLBI, there's actually companion applications. So the Clinical Coordinating Center submits one application that really has the heavy science in it, but then the companion application is what our group would send, which is the Data Coordinating Center, that has more of the statistical and data management aspects, but they really complement one another. So those would be our funding opportunities. And then last but not least, so Siren does have education and training opportunities. So there's a lot of professional development that we want to give to early career researchers, but also to the research coordinators and anyone involved in conducting the clinical trial. We have open monthly journal clubs that it's the third Wednesday of every month. You can go to the website to find Siren website to find out more information, but that's one great opportunity to hear what's going on out there. And we also have Siren working groups that anyone who's maybe part of a hub or part of a site that's participating in Siren, you can join a working group, and that's also on our website. In addition to that, Siren does have a fellowship program, and I put the link so you could go to our website and find out more about it. But it's open to trainees and early career investigators affiliated with an active Siren site. Eligible applicants can include residents, clinical fellows, graduate students. And the fellows, we try to embed the fellows into the active Siren studies because it really gives them an opportunity and hands-on experience of how to conduct a trial. And hopefully through that process, they can also be part of some scholarly product during their term. There's also, Siren also has monthly didactic presentations, and that's open to anyone. Again, the calendar's on the Siren website. If anyone's interested in a Siren Fellowship program, you can contact your Award Hub PI, so that list of the map that I sent, and they each have their own local application process. And you can find out more information. So thank you. I will pass it over to Pooja to talk about StrokeNet.
Okay, I'll try to keep it fairly brief. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. Let me get this in presentation mode. There we go. Okay. So one sec here. Just move that over. Excellent. Okay. So you're going to hear some of the same themes you heard with the other networks. So by the way, are you seeing my full presentation or are you seeing the one with the notes and stuff?
We're seeing the notes.
I was afraid of that. That's what my double screen. Shoot. Okay. I don't know why I did that. Okay. You know what I'll do? I'll just share it like this. This will just be faster. Just let me get to the chase. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So I'll just keep this. You should be able to see this. Okay. Right. It's just the presentation. So you're not seeing my whole screen, are you? You're just seeing the presentation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just
okay, perfect. Wonderful. Okay, good. So we already talked about the dismantling and rebuilding and Now we're going to focus in on StrokeNet, which consists of phase 2 and 3 trials, as well as biomarker validation and ancillary studies and a training program and we were established in 2013. So it's been a good, 13 years now to harness the leadership and experience of the stroke field and efficiently create and complete high quality multi-site trials, typically 5 or more sites, although there are exceptions. Related biomarker validation studies, just like Chris mentioned for NeuroNext, those would be ones that are like basically at the last stage where they would next be used in a clinical trial. And then ancillary studies off of our StrokeNet trials. And then our other charge from the very beginning has been to train the next generation of stroke clinical researchers. And that has been a huge success with over 200 trainees and something like 30 K awards, and I'll mention to you a few actually clinical trial methods course participants, several, and some funded StrokeNet grants. So I'm not going to repeat all this, same infrastructure as everybody else. The NIH and NINDS are always involved in these really expensive grants and especially infrastructural grants. So we work very closely with them. University of Cincinnati, we've got the National Coordinating Center. The multiple PIs are Joe Broderick and myself, and then the National Data Management Center and the multiple PIs are led by Jordan Elm at Medical University of South Carolina. So we have 27 regional coordinating centers that are affiliated with more than 500 affiliated sites. Last I heard, we were the largest network actually at NIH. So it's definitely a bit of a behemoth. Among those, over 300 have enrolled at least one participant in a trial. 283 sites, actually that number doesn't look exactly right. That might have been a misquote, but that's right, 283 sites in the US, 44 sites out of the US. So, it's funny because I always want to show a picture give a sense of the scale of StrokeNet. And I recently went to WebDCU, which is our database, to find out how many colleagues are associated with our trials to date. And it's 11,500. So there's a reason I can't make a picture. But this is one of our trial teams, the sister trial team. And as I know Chris and Valerie will attest to, these tend to take a life of their own. Like we have this such a StrokeNet family, and we're all in this, and we know it's bigger than any one of us. And it's hard to give credit to anybody because there's so many people that make anything happen. We've enrolled over 18,000 trial participants. And another interesting fun fact that we recently realized was that 70% of our 298 enrolling sites are at community hospitals. So we're pleased with that engagement as well and the generalizability of our work. So, and actually I'm seeing I updated the numbers here. Sorry, I was a little sloppy. 57 enrolling sites now outside the US. These are our trials, and with asterisks are the 18 that are either closed or closing, and there are 12 ongoing. I won't get into too much detail, but I'll share with you a few high points. I'll mention that Diffuse 3 trial, we were so proud to be part of that. It extended, as you all know, mechanical thrombectomy beyond 6 hours out to 24 hours from last known well, along with the Dawn trial. The CREST-2 trial just finished up, and that's what brought us the idea of sort of doing stenting for carefully selected patients with asymptomatic carotid stenosis. Several other here I could highlight, but what I'll say is I want to just point out to you there's several that actually got designed in the clinical trial methods course. So I think that's something fun to share with you. Those include Sleep Smart. Devin Brown was in my group in the clinical trial methods course when we went, and I remembered her talking about Sleep Smart. We'll be getting the final results, I believe, at the International Stroke Conference next year. Another one was Arcadia. Human Kamel went through the clinical trial methods course. And those are just a couple examples. There are probably others. And then we have our own NIH StrokeNet trainees who actually run studies. So Captiva MRI is run by Adam de Havilland from Yale. And then the sister trial is being run by Eva Mystery with me, and she's at University of Cincinnati. So I want to mention that as just persistence, it pays off, and you'll get to run your own trials eventually if you haven't already. Somebody asked in the chat box a really good question. We have trials, as you can see here, with international partnerships. It has gotten trickier in the current funding environment, no doubt. But for example, with Verify, with Verify, I have a multiple PI in New Zealand. And so there's a mechanism for them to get an award from NIH that's just a little different from the sub-award, but she's working seamlessly with me as a multiple PI in our verified biomarker validation study. It's been a little more complicated for some trials like FASTEST that's going in for a competitive renewal where patients are being enrolled in other countries. But the mechanism is being sorted out as we speak. So it's not a deal breaker, but we're working through it because we have no doubt that's the future of stroke care. I'll say the most successful models, like right now, the Resolve trial that's going through our funding process, they got discrete grants from each country. And then they're going to go ahead and pull those all together into one unified trial. But they got a grant in Japan and they got a grant in Australia. So things like that. We also work with industry. We do that as sometimes they're just providing drug, but sometimes they're even providing us per patient funds because they have more vested interest, or even paying for the trial to go abroad, things like that. I'll mention also an enduring clinical trial that we have, which is actually multiple trials in one, in a sense, the STEP platform, and it's for patients that have intracranial medium or large vessel occlusions, and it's integrated operationally with a master protocol and inferentially with largely one statistical equation. And for this, if some of you in the group have ideas, you can propose assets, in other words, study questions within STEP. It's a more nimble mechanism than we have with our usual NIH peer review, and it's allowed industry to directly apply and run assets within the platform. And we've got some kind of going through the process right now. I won't read you this list, but I'll say proud of just a lot of the cool stuff. And I want to echo what Valerie said, that, this kind of innovation can only happen when, there's a lot of teamwork and these longstanding relationships. So it lets you get a little bit more creative as you work together with this already built team. And I think it's a wonderful resource for everybody, even if you're brand new to trials. We have committees that are critical backbone of our infrastructure, and particularly around trial development. When someone has a new trial, and let's say it's an acute stroke trial, we send them to the acute stroke working group, and Karen Johnston and Jeff Saver and their working group team dig in and sort of give you advice about, any pitfalls you might have in peer review and how to create the best design. And then I'll end by just talking to you briefly about child development. And I've left the link here. You'll get these slides. But, and just say that in general, what we ask is if you have got a child that's potentially StrokeNet, appropriate, we'll have you contact either the NCCPIs, myself, or Joe Broderick, or the working group chairs, which you'll have this slide, but, they include Karen Johnston, Jeff Saber, Human Kamal, who went through this course, Sepi Amin Hajani, and Steve Kramer and Steve Wolf. And then basically we have you fill out a synopsis, just like Chris mentioned. It's fairly basic with just big picture information, and then send that synopsis to discuss at the relevant working groups, get advice, and then help you put your best foot forward. So I will end there and open it up for questions. We're happy to take any types of questions that can be helpful to everybody.
Before we start questions, I did want to go back and clarify one point that I failed to hit on in NeuroNext. Even though the OT announcements are the same, there is a particular interest in pediatric studies. And Adam Hartman is also a program officer for pediatric studies. And so if people have ideas in the neurosciences and pediatrics, that is also something that is of special interest to NeuroNext. That got buried because it's the same OT, but I did want to clarify that. And then if anyone has questions, I think you can put them in the chat, or I think raise your hand. Megan, right? Either one should work.
I just wanted to thank all three of you. I thought they were superb presentations. And I wanted to ask the first question, which is how can young investigators get involved or new investigators in all of your networks?
I'll say if you're completely new, it's good to partner up with a multiple PI because at least in StrokeNet, they tend to be large scale. And but frankly, just reach out to us and we'll help talk to you about it and help you plug you in. But we'll generally ask if you're a completely brand new researcher, clinical trialist, and because we're multi-center and we provide the infrastructure, but we expect you to drive that you partner with a card-carrying trialist who's kind of been down that road before. But I'm sure it's different in other networks.
Well, I think it's similar. I think in many ways, like I agree, it's important to kind of partner with somebody who kind of can provide guidance on the clinical trial, but it's also, I think, kind of an advantage if you're junior and you have that partner because you don't have to find the infrastructure. You don't have to find all of these operational pieces that it takes to do a clinical trial. It's there for you, and you really have to learn how to work with them, but mostly your task is managing the scientific pieces of the study and helping the network help you be successful.
Yeah, and I think also as an early investigator, like I mentioned, each network has so many different opportunities for you to kind of gain experience. And also, I know through the CTMC, when we see a project that someone's putting forth, we kind of help guide which would be the best network. But if you don't have a project, I think, or if you have a small project, I think that ancillary study component and trying to see what other things you could answer from the parent study that maybe the parent study is not addressing is a great experience for, the initial leading of a project. Not as big as a multi-center clinical trial, but you still have a lot of facets that you have to consider, and it's a good learning environment too.
Good question, Robin.
By the way, I forgot to point out on my slide, if you just put in NIH StrokeNet, you'll get to the NIH StrokeNet website. It's on my last slide, and it has like the funding announcements and stuff that Valerie and Chris had in their slides.
I think it is worth making the point that when you talk about young investigators, the other thing that I think seems intuitive but is probably worth saying, it's very much like being in the course. Right? You can have a good idea, but you are still expected to like take the lead and flesh out the protocol and do the type thing. So it's similar to the course. Just bringing a good idea is not enough. You really have to have the time, the commitment, and the effort devoted to doing it. That is an expectation. So making sure not just that you have like a clinical trial mentor, but that you're in an environment where you're going to have the time and resources to do that is important as well.
Thank you so much. It's really, really helpful. I'm Sunny. I'm from Duke. I do have a question. I think Dr. Valerie mentioned in one of her slides talking about the process of developing proposal, grant submission, approval, etc. I want to ask, is that the same process for StrokeNet? I think Dr. Khatri has a slide on trial development. So let's see, we discuss a proposal, we think, okay, it's pretty good. And then what's the next step? Same thing, do we submit to, for example, an NDS, review, etc. So want to know what's the process of the proposal developing and what's the time frame from the, starting the discussion to the end of, let's see, funding. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I didn't get into too much detail, but once you feel like you've got the idea fleshed out, we recommend that you reach out to one of us either as NCC PIs or the working group chairs, and then or your NINDS program officer, and just kind of run it by them just to make sure we're on the right track, and then we'll basically direct you to then formally submit it through it with our concept form. We all have different forms we use that have been built with NINDS about the relevant information they and we need to help make sure we get your concept developed appropriately. And then you would present it at the working group. Things have gotten a little bit easier and harder at the same time, I would say, in StrokeNet, and I'm guessing it's similar for the other networks. We used to have this step after you had the concept where you would then send it to NINDS and they would approve the concept to go forward as a full application. It was called Extramural Science Committee Approval, ESC. That process no longer exists with the new government administration's implementation. And so what we do now is we basically just help every proposal go through, but we tell you whether we have concerns about its feasibility. And if we don't think it's going to be feasible for the network, then we don't provide a letter of support. And so most people wouldn't want to go in without a letter of support because that just wouldn't make sense. So that's the way we're managing that. It does mean we're actually getting more proposals through. So it is a bit of a machine. And I will say in the process, you gotta have a long view on this because we do make you do a feasibility assessment where you survey the sites and we make sure we're going to have the patients for you. So all in all, that process takes maybe 9 months or so. Sometimes longer because you go back and you're like, oh, they caught like a fatal flaw. Like that smart statistician actually pointed out something I got to talk to my primary statistician about, and I got to rethink this. So.
Yeah, just to reiterate the timing, you mentioned the timing, and just to reiterate Pooja's point, these aren't fast, from the original idea. These take a while, but that's true. I mean, whether it's a network or not, clinical trials to flesh out to something that would be fundable do take a good amount of time. And I think that's also something that needs to be recognized coming into this, is there's going to be a lot of, it's similar to those of you in the course, it's similar to your product. What you came with and what you have now and what you're probably going to have at the end are similar in concept, but not maybe identical to what you came with. I think this process is very similar to that.
Yeah, I agree. And so don't think it's a 3-month process. We're talking definitely more a year process, maybe is probably closer to it.
I
Yeah.
hesitated to say 9 months. That's like if
I know,
everything
right?
goes perfectly.
Everything was perfect. But I think the other thing just to point out, so Pooja was mentioning they had like a feasibility survey. The networks are slightly different. StrokeNet has these certain forms that need to be completed with proposals. Siren, we want to see something, but we don't have like an official form, so to say. But we want to have the ideas fleshed out. So that's something we'll work. So it's not like if you go to our website, there's a form submission process or anything. But again, you can reach out to any of the Siren leadership and we're happy to work with you and talk to you more about it.
I will say that through that process, we generally, as we've gotten fine-tuned, we were having a pretty good success rate. We have a new peer review process, so we'll see. But like we were at about 40% of trials getting funded, trial concepts before the new peer review process. So we were proud of that.
Great, thank you so much. Really inspiring to see some of the CTMC already are moving forward with larger trial. Really, really exciting. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, if you go way back, Pooja is even a CTMC alumnus from the
Big fan. I couldn't have done it without this group. The PRISMS trial, which is now published, was from CTMC.
Any other questions?
Yasmin said not too far back. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, what would you foresee in the future or hope for in the future of your networks?
It's a good question.
I'll tell you one thing I'm really excited about. I want us to build a core module, and we're working on this to be able to do more EHR-based trials, to get into the pragmatic space and turn out some questions that are sort of lower cost, but really important for clinical care. And also implementation science is something that we're all kind of finding ourselves gearing towards, where we're saying like, gosh, we got this great result with point and chance, but not everyone's getting dual antiplatelet therapy for stroke, for example. How can we do that better?
I think some of the things for Siren, at least one of the things, is really trying to figure out the best. And when I say best, I guess it's kind of efficient and I can't think of the term, but anyways, about really working with either patient advocacy groups or patients to really understand the outcomes that are meaningful to the patient. We've definitely worked with this, like in our status epilepticus trial, but I think also branching out to some of the other disease areas we work with. I don't know if we found the best way to do it, but still trying to engage that aspect of the study design, coming up with really good outcomes and things that are feasible and meaningful to the patient.
Yeah, I think for us, it's we with the new renewal we have, I mentioned the gene therapy consortium. We also have a new pediatric committee that is trying to bring proposals forward. And I think those are two areas that are challenging but very interesting to work in. And I think, I mean, this may sound sappy, but I think for all of us, part of the reason we're doing this is it's good to feel like you're working on stuff that makes a difference in the end. And I think that's what is really rewarding about all of this is, yes, we're working, we're making money, we're supporting our families, but I think it is nice to step back and look at the trials we've all worked on and how they've made a difference, either if we're bringing therapies forward or being clear that therapies should not be studied any further and you need to divert resources to other places, which are equally as important. That probably sounds really sappy, but I do think it's why a lot of us do this.
I mean, I feel like it's given me a lot of meaning in my career. I'm glad you brought that up, Chris. And I think we all do. And Valerie, I just wanted to add, I was just thinking to myself, sometimes we meet as a network of networks and we're working on patient engagement and how we can do it better too. I think this is clearly an important forward approach to doing better designs and meaningful outcomes for our patients. So we should compare notes at one of our network of networks. Because we're just trying to reinvent again and how can we do it better?
Regaining trust in research, just everything that's been coming up.
Yeah.
And on the not so serious side, there is a positive correlation between involved in a network and your ability at karaoke. So,
especially Chris. Chris has the best.
But you will all find out at the end.
You haven't seen Valerie lately, Pooja. She's become a karaoke legend. But yeah, Robin has a good point in there that Sophia Wang is bringing patient engagement, and
awesome.
For the trainees will be meeting with has met with each of them, but also will be available at the course to discuss that. So,
in fact, that is our next webinar, which will be on June 5th. So Dr. Wang will be presenting incorporating participants' perspective in clinical trial design. So we hope to see you all back here a week from today for that talk, which will be really great. Thank you for transitioning there so seamlessly. And thank you very much to all our presenters. We have a couple minutes if anyone has any last questions. Otherwise, we will let everyone get back to their busy days. Thank you again for being here. Please click on that link in the chat and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Pooja.